The central claim of Islam is absolute, that the Quran is a literal, perfect, and final word of God. It insists that this book is eternal, flawless, and free from contradiction. Tonight, we hold that claim to the highest possible standard. If this book contains even one clear mistake, one flaw of history, one moral failing, one glaring contradiction, the entire divine structure collapses. And when we test the Quran, we find not the perfection of a creator, but the unmistakable fingerprints of a human hand. A message from an all-knowing deity, meant for all people across all time, should be clear. Yet, the most immediate flaw of the Quran is its profound obscurity. It claims to be clear, Mubin, yet it requires centuries of complex scholarly interpretation, debate, and mediation just to explain its meaning. If God wanted to guide humanity directly, why produce a text so reliant on scholarly scaffolding that ordinary people cannot make sense of key verses without expert help? The very necessity of tafsir exegesis is not a defense of its clarity. It is a confirmation of its opacity. Moreover, the Quran admits its own ambiguity. It states that some verses are allegorical and that only God knows their interpretation. This internal division undermines the entire premise of clear guidance. This vagueness leads directly to division. Scholars disagree, sometimes dramatically, on what verses mean. Take Surah 434, the so-called wife-beating verse. The key word daraba has many meanings: to strike, to separate, to leave, or to travel. One interpretation, favored by traditional Sunni legal schools, permits a husband to strike his wife lightly. Another interpretation, favored by modern scholars, argues that it should mean separate from them or go away from them, banning the physical act entirely. This is not a minor technicality. It shows that even among experts, the text is so unclear that it splits on even the most basic moral guidance. A book requiring a lifetime of study, and yet still yielding opposite conclusions on domestic conduct, is not clear. It is confusion dressed up as depth. A divine book must be accurate, but the Quran is anchored firmly in the limited knowledge of 7th century Arabia. It is filled with historical and scientific mistakes that reflect human ignorance, not divine insight. Historically, the text shows confusion about earlier biblical traditions. It mistakenly identifies Mary, the mother of Jesus, as the sister of Aaron and daughter of Imran, confusing her with Miriam, who lived 1,000 years earlier. It also makes an entirely false claim that Jews considered Ezra the son of God. Furthermore, the Quran contains anachronisms, such as referring to the Samari during the time of Moses, when the city of Samaria was founded centuries later. These are not minor poetic slips. They are plain factual problems. The text's attempts at science are even more revealing. First, in embryology, the Quran claims human development proceeds from a clinging clot, then a lump of flesh, then bones are formed, and then flesh is placed on the bones. This is not how human development works. Bones and muscle tissue form simultaneously in a coordinated process. The description reflects primitive observation, perhaps of miscarriages, not advanced knowledge. Second, anatomy. It claims that semen comes from between the backbone and the ribs. This is anatomically false. Third, cosmology. The Quran reflects outdated views of the universe. It describes the sun setting in a muddy spring and claims that mountains were placed on the earth to stabilize it and prevent it from shaking. In reality, mountains are the result of tectonic activity and are often linked to earthquakes, not their prevention. The claim is the reverse of reality. Furthermore, it treats stars as missiles to drive away devils, confusing massive nuclear spheres with small rock fragments. If the author of the Quran were a god, we would expect insight. What we find instead is ignorance. The book is a product of its time. The moral code of divine message should surpass the tribal customs of ancient societies. The Quran fails this moral test, reflecting instead the harsh tribal customs of 7th century Arabia. It openly permits and regulates slavery, allowing sexual access to female captives, and never declaring the institution of slavery itself wrong. It also permits wife beating for disobedience. No system based on respect would authorize such treatment. Most damningly, the moral system relies heavily on coercion and fear. The text repeatedly threatens eternal torture for those who fail to believe its message. This is not justice. People are not judged solely by their actions or their search for truth. They are judged by whether they believe what they are told. Disbelief leads to eternal suffering. The text uses threats of fire, molten metal, and eternal regret. This is not divine compassion. It is control through fear. Finally, the Quran constantly contradicts itself on matters of responsibility. It demands that people choose belief, yet it repeatedly states that Allah guides whom He wills and leads astray whom He wills. This inherent contradiction suggests that guidance is arbitrary, rendering moral responsibility meaningless. The Quran claims perfection, guidance, and finality, but when examined, it behaves exactly like something a man could write. It is filled with errors, contradictions, and moral standards that are time-bound. It does not rise above its culture. It adapts its tone based on Muhammad's political situation. It uses circular reasoning, claiming divinity, daring critics to match its style, and then immediately threatening them with eternal fire if they fail. This is not how rational people test truth. That is how cults control people through fear. The Quran cannot persuade without fear, cannot prove its claims, and cannot tolerate scrutiny. It is not a timeless message from a universal God. It is a flawed human product, offering a mixture of tribal warnings, borrowed stories, and theological claims dressed up as absolute truth. The evidence is clear. The Quran does not carry the signature of Creator. It carries the imprint of a human hand. And that is why it fails the test of divinity completely.